This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you?
I'm not an easy man to move emotionally, necessarily, anymore. You know, some of that's cynicism, some of that's pessimism, some of that is, well, life just tends to knock the emotional stuffing out of you after a while, when things don't necessarily go your way or whatever, and you learn to toughen up, especially as a man. You learn not to show emotion too much because it's equated with weakness, and not just by other men. This isn't a matter of toxic masculinity. And then there's the drugs, the mind-altering drugs, the prescription ones, before anyone gets upset in any way, that I am on, that have the side effect of blunting one's emotions. But even so, I was extremely moved by Greta's speech. And if you can listen to Greta's speech, listen to this young woman, not a child, showing so much pain and investment and desire for change, lambasting world leaders and even the leaders of the various climate movements for being all talk, hot air, ironically enough. If you can listen to that and not be moved, not feel ashamed even, or perhaps guilty, would be a better way of putting it. If you can listen to it and not have an emotional reaction, then I would suggest that if I can, and you can't, or won't, or don't, that there is probably something wrong with you.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones.
Greta is 16. That's not a child, at least not in the frame of reference in my country, the UK. Alright, it's not full adulthood, but it's old enough. It's old enough to fight in our military. It's old enough to leave school and take on a job. It's old enough to fuck. I think it's old enough to know what she's talking about, and to care about it, and to want to use this platform to speak about it. When I was 16, I may have been peculiarly precocious in this, but I was already politically interested, politically active, a little bit naive. I hadn't had quite all of that emotional stuffing knocked out of me yet that I was talking about. But I was engaged enough, I knew enough about how things worked, and on the subjects that I was interested in, I was as knowledgeable, or more, than a lot of people. So I don't think her age is necessarily a valid thing upon which to attack her. And all of you showing concern that this child is being exploited or endangered, well, that's kind of her point, that children are being endangered, their future is being endangered. This is going to be the first generation for a long time that's worse off in many measurable ways than the one that went before it. Their world is the one we leave for them. So if you really gave as much of a shit about children as you claim to about Greta, as a way of discounting her, ironically, then you would start to apply pressure to do many of the things that she is arguing for.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you!
This seems to be what has triggered a lot of people. Criticism of capitalism, or one of the base assumptions of capitalism, the creation of value. There is a finite limit on exploitable resources until and unless we break free of the bonds of Earth and genuinely take to space, at least not to the stars necessarily, but to the solar system, in terms of industry and mining, resource finding. We're never going to be able to solve our ecological issues by moving off planet. It's simply too impractical and too expensive. But unless we expand beyond this world, there's a limit. Production can continue in various ways. Intellectual property, for example, we can continue to expand that. But in terms of physical reality, stuff, there's a limit. Infinite growth is just not possible. You know, that's basically an immutable law of physics, whether you apply it to economics or not, which are basically voodoo, but still. And the problems that we face are grave, and they are such that we're all going to need to compromise. We're all going to have to settle for less. And if we can't, if we won't, if we don't, we're in serious, serious trouble. This doesn't have to mean an end to capitalism, necessarily, for those of you who are worried about that. It just means an end to the kind of total exploitation, the total capitalism that we have in our lives. That's what it means. And money is not the be-all and end-all of everything. What is the point of being wealthy if there's nothing to spend it on? What good will your money do you when you're starving? What good will your money do you when the world is too hot in some places to even live? And that's a very real prospect.
For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe.
I don't like the language there, evil, right? But it is something that most people understand and grasp to mean a particular thing. I think people are just self-interested, self-obsessed. Many of the people making the most important decisions in the world are detached in one way or another from the world, insulated from it in a little bubble of wealth, and I'm going to use the P word, privilege in its proper sense. So they don't necessarily get it, they don't understand, and there are a lot of vested interests and a lot of money is thrown around protecting those vested interests. That's a big part of what prevents us from acting to change things. There are plenty of people who have massive issues with the Green Movement, with Greta, who throw around terms like eco-fascism and so on. And yet these are the same people who are more than willing to bring in swinging new laws to prevent immigration or voter ID registration, which does tend to suppress people in the lower income brackets and so on. They're willing to patrol the shores, to build walls, to vote for far-right candidates. They're willing to entertain actual fascism because they don't like brown people or the culture of brown people. I'll meet you halfway, right? Even though they tend to acclimate and adapt and become part of the broader society over 2, 3, 4 generations. You're willing, or they, shall we say, I don't know who's watching, they're willing to entertain a slide towards fascism for such a petty, meaningless thing as that. And yet the fate of the world, the fate of our species, right? They're not willing to entertain even the slightest hardship. I think your priorities are utterly screwed. And she's right, the science has been clear for decades and decades. And we haven't really done anything except, as others have said, rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic.
The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist.
There's an analogy that I don't think I've heard used before. What everyone tends to use is the boiling frog analogy, and that's anachronistic anyway. Frogs do hop out, but everyone understands that one. But I've got another way of looking at it, so bear with me. A lot of you drive, yeah, or you're at least passengers. Okay, so you're in a car, you're driving along, reasonable speed, 40, 50 miles an hour, whatever. Town road, city road, yeah, not one of the main ones where the people are, but yeah, a road. And a kid darts out of the siding, whatever, up ahead, and moves out in front of your car in the road, right? The time to brake is the moment you see that kid, because you've got to lose all that velocity, you've got a lot of inertia. So you brake before you hit the kid, right? And even if you don't see them in good time, the thing you do is you slam on the brakes, because the more speed you lose, the less damage you're going to do to the kid. You don't wait until you've hit the child to slam on the brakes. Now, we've seen climate change coming for a long time. We've recognised that it has been occurring essentially since the Industrial Revolution, looking back on the records. So we could have slammed on the anchors earlier, and the earlier we hit the brakes, the less damage we do to the kid, and the easier it is to repair the damage. And if we hit the kid hard enough, they're going to die. And there's no point hitting the brakes afterwards, and reversing can't really make things any better. The more damage they take, the more effort is required to put them back together, to fix their bones, to transplant an organ, to stop the internal bleeding. You see the point of the analogy. And we've seen this coming, but we haven't hit the brakes yet, really. Our foot is hovering over the brake. So we need, the sooner we do things, the better. Right, when people are saying we've got 12 years to save the world, or whatever it might be, they're not saying the world is going to end in 12 years. It's that we have to bring the car to a halt, or at least slow it down sufficiently in 12 years in order to avoid killing the kid that's run out in front of us. That's what that means.
How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years.
I share the frustration that a lot of you have with a lot of people who've hitched their wagon to the green movement as it has become more urgent, to the climate change cause as that has become more urgent. The Green New Deal should be an absolute no-brainer in the US. And the US is a massive contributor, and historically has been a massive contributor to global warming. And they have the money and resources and expertise and talent to find genuine technological solutions to these problems that we're facing. But Everyone and their dog seems to have attached their political dogma and their other ideas and so on to the cause, hoping that in our panic and our need that they can essentially Trojan horse their other ideas in as well. Now, I happen to believe that a lot of these ideas are good. I think America could do with shifting to the left. I think much of the world could do with shifting to the left and providing for their people and collectivizing in a lot of ways. Not all. Collectivization's not the solution to everything. But because they are attaching all these other things to the problem, that makes it less likely that people are going to accept it, or going to go along with it, or even going to buy into the genuine part, the necessity of making ecological change. You could make a grand nationalistic narrative out of this, whether you're in the States or any other advanced Western nation. You could say, we are going to lead the world in this technology, we are going to make a difference, we are going to save the planet. Right? And you could sell it to your people like that. We are going to do this. All right? We owe it, or these other people aren't being responsible, so we're going to do it. You know, you could take that angle on it. You could say, we are going to innovate. We are going to have the best technology, the cleanest industry. We're going to create thousands upon thousands of new jobs in green technology. We're going to pour money into this. We're going to have a Manhattan Project to solve the climate issue. We're going to have an X Prize to solve the climate issue. You could do that. And I think that would appeal to a lot of American bombast and its perception of itself as the crowning achievement of Western civilization. Yeah? It doesn't matter that it's not true, that's how you could sell it to people. But trying to attach other things, I don't think works. I don't think Greta is shaming anyone, I think she is instilling a feeling of guilt. And it's natural to buck against that, but purely scientific arguments haven't worked. Purely technical arguments haven't worked. If we talk about how things will be in 2100, which is where most of the predictions cut off, for some reason that's hard for people to understand, probably because they reckon they'll be dead by then. So we need emotional appeals like Greta's, and we need to be able to wrap what needs to be done in different forms of political bombast and rhetoric in order to get people on board.
There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you.
This speaks to a bigger problem, I think, that we face, and I honestly don't know what the solution is. Time was when leaders, political leaders, would tell you how it was, right? They would say, right, this is going to be tough, we've got solutions, this is a real problem, this is what we need to do. But as James O'Brien says, you know, there's always keys for the haunted house, but not for the speak your weight machine, right? People want to be titillated, entertained, pandered to. They don't want to be given the bald facts. Because the bald facts are often not entertaining. They're often nuanced, they're often difficult, they're often a bitter pill that we have to swallow. And this, unfortunately, is a weakness in democracies. Especially when we've got the rise of populism as we have now. We don't have leadership, we have pandering. And that's how you get Trump. And that's how you get Brexit. There's also failings on the left to engage and debate and so on with people, but the populist right arises by pandering to people, to their basest, most emotional requirements and needs. But the bitter pill, the fact is that it is going to be much more expensive, much more difficult. It's going to be much harder. There's going to be more deprivation the longer we wait to act. But we still have people trying to appease the public by saying, oh, it won't be that bad, or it's not real, it's a hoax, they're lying. 98% of climate-related scientists are all lying. And then that was retreated from to an extent to say, oh, climate change is happening, but it's a natural process, it's nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us dragging all this sequestered carbon out of the ground in the form of gas and oil and coal and burning it all and dumping it all into the atmosphere. Nothing to do with us whatsoever, even though over time that adds up to a huge amount. No, one volcano, and this is true, could do as much. But it hasn't, and we have. And what if that goes off and adds to it? Whether it's us or not, and it is us, we can do things to offset the problem. People like to refer back to, in the 70s they said we were going into another ice age. We should be. That we're not is a cause for concern. That the temperatures are rising rather than falling is a concern. If we were heading into another ice age, what we're doing might be a solution to that. But as it is, we've kind of overshot. And it's all there in the geologic column, in the ice cores taken from the poles while we still can. It's all there, the information is all there, but that's not getting through, and so we have to resort to emotion. And if you want to avoid something like eco-fascism, or enforced veganism, or tucking into bug burgers or whatever else, if you want to avoid that to any extent, you have to act now. Now.
And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
That seems to have also been the big thing that put the cat amongst the pigeons. The idea that change is coming whether you like it or not. You know, it does have sinister overtones, but I think she means climate change is coming whether we like it or not, and eventually it's going to be unignorable, and by then we're staring down an environment that will end up looking at least as bad as the Eocene, the hothouse Eocene. Look it up. Eocene. Not a particularly hospitable planet to live on at that time. And that's what we're looking at least. You know, we could, if we don't change course, end up warming the planet by as much as 8 degrees eventually, which would render whole chunks of the Earth uninhabitable to humanity. It's not a very nice prospect. And this isn't a religion, this isn't a faith, this is fact. We don't know the full scale of the knock-on effects of global warming. We have some idea of what some of the chain reactions would be, like the release of methane hydrates. We're already having outgassing from tundra in Siberia and so on, which is another knock-on effect. But these are facts. If you want some nightmare fuel, I'm rereading The Uninhabitable Earth. It's a hard slog because it is frankly terrifying, but things need to be terrifying, I think, at this point. It's almost impossible to be too hysterical about the climate change issue. Right? It is an existential threat to our species. It's a mass extinction of our own making that could wipe out 95% of species, and odds are we're going to be amongst them. But I don't want to end on a completely hopeless note. There are things we can do. Yeah, we're not completely helpless in the face of this. We can clean up our act. We can reforest. We can start large-scale seaweed farming, which will also provide more fish, because fish can be farmed in the same farm ecosystem there, which will help feed our numbers. The latest information on population suggests that we'll cap out at about 9 billion people on Earth and no more. Yeah, that gives us a figure we can aim for. and that we can plan for. Provided we find new and innovative ways to produce food and so on, we should be able to cope with that, because we're coping now, essentially. But we need to find new ways so that we don't exhaust the land, or exhaust fossil fuels, which are often used in fertilizers and so on. And no, veganism isn't going to save that, but less meat will help. So we can reforest. To do that, we can do carbon sequestration. One of the easiest ways to do that is to plant large amounts of fast-growing trees, like birch, silver birch, and then sequester them either in the depths of the sea or as char and other ways. There'll be new technologies that we can employ. There are aerosols we can spray. We can encourage large phytoplankton growths using iron seeding, though the side effects of that might be bad. We can green our cities, make every roof a garden, vertically farm in your flat, plant more trees in urban areas, plant more trees everywhere. You know, there's things we can do individually and collectively that as a whole will make a difference. If the worst comes to the worst, we do have the technology to put orbital shaders between us and the sun. But this is going to require collective action, group action, as well as individual action. For myself, I've started paying charities to plant trees to offset my carbon. Depending where you want the trees to be planted, and we all live on the same planet, so it doesn't particularly matter, but you can get a tree planted in your name for as little as $1 per tree. I use up about 1.5 to 2 Earths in terms of resources and carbon, so I need to plant about 150 to 200 to 250 trees to offset that, which is $250. Over time, over a few months, that seems affordable to me, and I'm not the richest person in the world. So don't feel entirely hopeless. There are technological solutions. There are things that we can all individually do. Maybe we should start doing them rather than finding excuses or apologia. We have to be realistic, not comfortable. And stop picking on Greta. Zang.